you're seeing on my screen here, that's that quick guide that I was referencing just a moment ago. And again, this essentially itemizes all the enhancements that were made in this past weekend's February 2021 release. But as I mentioned, for today's purposes, I'm actually going to go into the environment. I am using a fake client's profile, which I'll be using to demonstrate all the enhancements that were made. And what I think I'm going to start with here is kind of just an overview of what we were trying to accomplish from a goals perspective here. So a lot of what we did here was, as I mentioned, centralized around, enhancing your existing assessment and plan of care request module. And so we did various changes within this, everything from, making updates to make it very clear, which agency and staff member was responsible for and took care of that request, putting in some updates in terms of tracking the due date for those requests and modifying the logic of how that due date is calculated. We also did some modifications within the actual requests to give you some additional functions for justifying and adding attempted contacts, and I'll cover that in great detail as well. And then we did some miscellaneous updates to your My List as well. So I'll start covering those one by one. So what you're seeing on my screen here is when you're inside a client's record and you go to that assessment and plan of care module under programs, you first start on your list page. So first couple of updates that I want to call out is we made a couple of changes to the output columns on this list. So the first thing, very minor change, this first column here was previously called request date. We just did a minor relabeling here, so now it's referred to as the original request date. And we did that because, as you know, the assessment and POC request process does have a triage. So we wanted to just clearly differentiate between when the request first came in versus if it had been triaged, you would see that updated triage date over here under that column. This particular request hasn't been triaged, which is why you see it as an A. And then ultimately, another update that we did was if an assessment and POC request has been triaged from one assigned agency to another, then the due date is actually going to be updated. So right now, the way due dates work is it's 15 day. It's the original request date plus 15 days is your due date. And what the changes that we made is if we triage this to another agency, it's going to use the triage date plus 15 days to recalculate the due date. And I'll actually demonstrate that in about 10 minutes when I get to that portion of the demonstration. Another update that we did to this list page is we added a new output column to make it clear who the assigned staff was that was responsible for this request. And again, we wanted to start tracking that a little bit more closely because we're ultimately going to utilize that information for reporting purposes. So first, what I'll do now that I've covered those minor updates on the list page is I'm actually going to go inside one of our active requests here. And there's a couple of things I want to point out in here. So again, on the details page, again, just like we had on the list page, we're showing who the assigned staff was. You can see that updated label for the original request date. But a couple other things that I had just mentioned that we did was added some new functionality. So the first piece of functionality I want to talk about is what we're referring to as a justification process. And the way that this is supposed to be used is, let's say that you have an active request, it has a due date, and you are either about to miss that due date or you're beyond that due date, and you wanted to provide to MDH the reason why that's going to be delayed. Then what you can do as an authorized user, and this would typically be the assigned assessor, could come into that request, and you're going to see this button in the upper right-hand corner that says Add Justification for Delay. And we've put together a predefined list of reasons here. Now let me zoom in a little bit just so I can make sure everybody can see that well. So here's the options that you can utilize, and you can choose multiple if need be. So you can see I can choose multiple options here. I'll just read through these. So it says referred individual has been hospitalized, unable to contact due to incorrect information, unable to contact due to missing information, unable to contact due to referred individual's unresponsiveness, referred individual requested that assessment be scheduled at a future date, referred individual was unable to attend the scheduled assessment, referred individual is in long-term care, or other, and if you choose other, you can enter comments as well. So if you need to, that is how you would add a justification for a delay in the request. So you could choose the reason or reasons. You could save that information. And when you save, you'll see that that information is stored on that details page in the assessment and POC request section right down here at the bottom. So now there's this subsection called justification for delay. We also added this information icon, and this is more so just MDH direction on how you should be utilizing this. So it's just a helpful tip that says a justification should only be entered if the delay is caused by the referred individual. Agency or assessor-related delays should be reported to the department separately. Carrie, I didn't know if you wanted to elaborate on that any further.
Sure, I can do that quickly, Nick. So the idea here, again, is, as we tried to encapsulate, is that the reason this is delayed is really on the part of the applicant or the participant. And so if there are staffing resources, understaffing, any other kinds of sort of staffing related delays, either in kind of an acute sense or in a longer term sense, those really are not appropriate here. Think of this again at the level of the individual. So there's something happening with that applicant or participant that is resulting in a delay, and we want to try to understand the context. It's all up to your administrators to report to the department, i.e. myself for the time being, that there is some other kind of delay that's not at the level of the individual, but really has to do with staffing resources or an individual assessor's ability to meet a deadline.
Perfect. Thank you, Carrie. Okay. Another thing, a couple other functionalities I want to talk about. So after you have logged a justification for delay, you do have 2 additional functions. So let's say you added it by mistake, or for whatever reason it doesn't need to be there. There is a delete function, which will appear after you add it. So you would click on delete justification for delay. It'll give you a little pop-up warning message, and you can either confirm or deny. So let's say I confirmed it and said, yes, I want to delete. Then that information would be cleared. So you see it's not there anymore. And then again, if I need to add something else back in, I can. And then the other function is, let's say you added a justification for delay and there needs to be an update, whether there's a new reason or additional reasons. You could always click on the edit justification and you can make updates as well. And those functions in terms of adding a justification, deleting a justification, or updating or editing the justification, those functions will continue to remain available so long as the request itself is still active. Once the request is inactivated, then those functions will not be there anymore. You'd still be able to view the information that you previously entered, but you wouldn't be able to modify it anymore. And that's similar to how most functions work in the system. Now, the other piece of functionality that we added into the assessment and POC request that somewhat kind of goes along with that justification is we've got a new section on the details page that's referred to as attempts to contact. So again, this is just another helpful tool. It's completely optional. You don't have to use it. But if, let's say, you're trying to do scheduling and you're trying to coordinate that meeting to do the assessment for the client, you can actually now log those attempted contacts. So on the details page, again, as long as the request is still active, you can click on Add Attempt. You could specify the date that you tried to make that attempted contact. You can specify whether or not it was successful or not. You can specify who you were trying to get in contact with. And you can optionally log comments if you want. And then similar to what we saw with the justification process, once you log that contact, you can save it into the record. You can edit it as long as the request is still active. So if you needed to update a piece of information, you could certainly do that. And then back on your details page, you could see, because I've added an attempt to contact, you can add as many as you need to. So there's no limit to that. You can edit them, you can delete them, you can view them. And again, this is just, it's a completely optional step, but this is just a new tool that we've added within the assessment and POC request module. Now, the next update that I wanted to talk us through a little bit, I'm actually go back to our list page here. I had mentioned that we put in some new business logic that is used now to determine what the due date is. And I'm actually going to demonstrate this functionality. So you can actually see I put this request in yesterday. I logged in as Carrie and I logged a request yesterday. This client lives in Baltimore City, so it was automatically assigned to Baltimore City Local Health Department. And the due date is calculated as yesterday, the date I put it in, plus 15 calendar days. So you can see right now it says 3/2. Now, the new business rule that we put in basically says if an active request gets triaged to another agency, and there's two ways that can happen, either MDH, an authorized user at MDH, can triage it to, let's say, Telegen or something like that. Or if a client changes jurisdictions, meaning let's say this client moved from Baltimore City to Montgomery, the system will recognize that, reassign the active request to the new agency, set the triage date, and that triage date will then be used to set the due date. So because today is the 16th, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to log in as an MDH user that has the ability to triage this. So I've logged in here as Jason Higgins. And you can see he has this assign functionality where he can triage this from Baltimore City Local Health Department to another agency. Click on that button. I'm going to assign this over to Telegen. And I'm going to submit that and confirm. And now what you're going to see actually happens here is if we look back at our list page, the agency assigned was changed to Telegen. It was given a triage date of today, and you can see the due date was recalculated. Now, instead of it being 3/2, it's set as 3/3. And again, the main reason behind this change is we wanted to make sure that when requests get triaged, the new agency has the proper allocated 15 days to complete that request, rather than it being driven off the original request date. And again, a lot of these changes we're putting in place so that we can do active monitoring and reporting. Now, what I'm going to do quickly here, just for the purposes of this demo, is I want to send this back over to Baltimore City Local Health Department. And I'm going to log back in as a representative from that local health department. So just bear with me for one moment. Right. And so again, you can see that the due date says 3/3. If I go in to view that request, I can see that triage information in the triage history. And so again, that's in alignment with existing functionality. So that's that update. Another minor update that we did is for an active request, you all do have that deactivate functionality. We did some minor updates to some of the reasons that are in that list. Now, for the purposes of this, just because I don't have all this memorized, I'm going to pull that up so I can show you all. This is in the quick guide. So here's a couple of the very minor modifications that we made. So first of all, we modified, there was an option in there that was called community resident is not MA eligible. We changed that to individual is not MA eligible. And then we added an option called moved out of state. And we added another option called unable to contact due to referred individuals' unresponsiveness. And you can see those right here on the page. So moved out of state, individuals not MA eligible, and unable to contact due to referred individuals' unresponsiveness. So a couple of minor updates in terms of those deactivation reasons. Other things that we did here, and for this, I'm going to jump over to our My List. So on the My List, you can see because my client has an active request, there's our fake client that we're dealing with today. Other very minor updates that we made here. So again, this output column, we relabeled from request date to original request date. We're showing the triage date, and we made that same update. I would need to refresh my page here. So actually, give me one moment and I'll do that. And I'll show you that the due date updated. Just gotta get that refreshed. Here we go. So you can see because this was triaged, the triage date will show, and the request due date was updated. So now it's calculated off the triage date. So the same changes we saw in the actual POC list page, we just made sure those rolled over into your My List as well. Another update that we made, and I had to do a screenshot for this one just because I didn't want to show any private health information here. I'll pull this up on the screen. There was previously a business rule that was sitting on top of the My List functionality that was only showing you a request if it wasn't more than 6 months old. Anything that was active still but older than 6 months old, the system was like hiding it from you. So we removed that business rule. I've got an example here. Again, this is a fake client, but you can see that even if it's over 6 months old, if it's still an active request, it will actively show on your My List so that you can track those and take the appropriate action, whether that be completing it or deactivating it. And then jumping back over into the system, I think I've covered just about everything. I just want to check one more thing. Oh yes, one more enhancement here. Another business rule that we put in place here, it's the last item in your quick guide. It basically says that in order to start an inter-eye assessment for a client, the client must have an active assessment and POC request. So if you try, so what I'm actually going to do here is, because I'm logged in as a user from the local health department, I'm going to deactivate this request, and I'll just choose any reason. And I'm going to try to start an inter-eye assessment. And you're going to see I get an error message that says, in order to start a new inter-eye for the client, please create an assessment and POC request. And so this is a specific rule we put in place because that assessment and POC request is really important from a system perspective and from MDH's perspective, because it kind of starts that timeline and allows us to track that the appropriate steps were taken in the appropriate allocated time. So this is just a new rule, minor rule that we put in. So as a local health department user, if you ever do happen to get this request or this error message, you all do have the ability to generate your own requests. So if there is a client that you are supposed to be doing an NRI for that does not have an active request, then you do have the ability to start that request yourself. And Carrie, I don't know how frequently that would happen, or if you wanted to elaborate on that any further in terms of why we put that rule in place.
Sure, I can just elaborate briefly. I think the prevalence really probably depends on the jurisdiction. So I think there are some jurisdictions that receive requests directly, and so they'll go ahead and start an NRI without an assessment request. We're sort of forcing you into a different path. Force is, maybe too strong of a word, but sort of forcing you into this path, as Nick says, because really this is the only way that we can look at assessments in the manner that in the manner that I'd like to evaluate. So if we don't have a request, we don't really have an anchor, and so we can't look at timeliness. So the request really gives us the ability to make sure that every assessment is sort of anchored with a request, and that there's some dates that are associated with that, so we can look at timeliness. We can look at the volume of assessment requests that you have, those types of things. So it's really, moving, again, next step towards this broader sort of evaluation and quality endeavor that we've spoken about several times.
Great, thanks, Carrie. So with that actually does bring me to the end of the functionality that I wanted to demonstrate in terms of the updates that we made this past weekend. I do want to now open it up for any questions that anybody has. You can feel free to unmute yourself and ask that question, or you can type it into the chat window of this meeting invite, whichever you prefer.
Hi, everyone. This is Ida. So that means that all the recertifications that we do, we have to now generate a referral for that.
So Ida, for recertifications, depending on what program you're talking about, but for like community options, ICS.
Generally, because the state has this 60-day leeway for us to complete the assessment prior to their recertification date.
Correct.
We
yes.
generally would start assessment. So what I need clarification is that moving forward, all those clients, we have to generate a referral for them.
So Ida, you shouldn't need to do that because there's actually a process built into LTSS Maryland that 60 days before the due date, the system is supposed to recognize that and automatically generate a request for you.
but they don't. There are some instances that they don't. We don't get a referral until 30 days to the, in other words, some of the clients, we get the referral after we've completed the assessment. So we just go in and deactivate the new request.
So that shouldn't be happening. If you see issues like that, you should report it via the feedback tool. But given, to make sure that you all can obviously keep doing your work, if that does happen and you need to proceed, then yes, you would have to generate that request. But given the system's working as it's supposed to, you shouldn't have to do that. So if you continue to see issues like that, where it's not generating the request for you 60 days prior, you should log that as a feedback item to the help desk.
Okay, thank you.
So Nick, just for some additional context, this is related to some of the challenges that you and I have spoken about specifically with the MedTech date, and when things sort of get stuck and don't move forward, where it doesn't sort of get reset, and so the system doesn't automatically trigger. So yes, as Nick said, Ida, you should certainly report that as feedback, and then we can continue to think about what other sort of system interventions we might need to look at in the future.
Any questions from anyone else?
This is your time, folks. This is your uninterrupted time with the brilliant Nicholas. So please use it wisely. He's far more knowledgeable than I about the system. So please, don't be afraid. Speak up. Ask your questions.
Hi, this is Donna in Montgomery.
Hi, Donna.
Hi. As far as the jurisdiction change part is interesting. Will we be able to do, because we have a lot of problems with that. We especially if we're doing a PASAR, we get the county, the existing county, to change the jurisdiction for us, and then that night it flips back again to the previous. And what we've been doing, if we get a client that moves from one county to another, that county, say it's Prince George's, will send me an email and ask me to change the county. Will that process change with this new addition?
No, so that process doesn't change. I can run through an example here on my screen. So right now I had mentioned this client, this fake client I've got here currently lives in Baltimore City. So let's say that the Baltimore City local health department came to find out, and let's say they had an active request. So let me generate a new one here just so that what we're talking about makes sense. So I'm going to start a redet. That's weird. Well, it's not going to let me do it.
Okay, while you're doing that, can I just make a comment?
Yes.
As far as what we found out was that the Medicaid MMIS, it flipping back and forth from the counties because of that. It's not because of the LTSS, it's because of Medicaid. So that person has to go to, we've had that problem before where I send an email, they switch it to us, especially the passers, and then the next morning before we finish, it switched back to the county. So what we found out was that it's the MMIS as a problem.
Yeah, so it's going to update on a nightly. So again, let me give some context here. So the client's jurisdiction is going to update nightly with the MMIS import. And so if there's a manual change to the jurisdiction, it's going to get overridden on a nightly basis by the scheduled job that comes into LTSS from MMIS, Nick, which I know you're very familiar with. Yep. The change has to be originated in the CARES. Right now, currently what DSS uses is the CARES system. So unless the individual or someone on their behalf makes the change at the level of the local Department of Social Services, the LDSS, with that information changing in CARES, then feeding into MMIS, and then subsequently into LTSS, it's going to get overwritten every night. So yes, the person has to correct their address with their local Department of Social Services, and that change has to be made in that system to then be able to influence the other systems.
Right. And what would ultimately then happen is, again, I found another example here. This person's in Baltimore City. Let's say that process of updating the client's jurisdiction in the client profile, so in the demographic section. Let's say, Donna, what jurisdiction do you work for?
Montgomery.
Montgomery. Okay, I'm going to move this client to Montgomery. I'll save that. What I'm going to do now, and I'm probably going to get an error. You can see I immediately lost access as Rochelle because the client's not in Baltimore City anymore. So I'm going to log in as you, Donna.
Her last name is Klein, Nick.
Yep, got it. So now if I jump back over into that assessment and plan of care module, you're going to see that by changing that jurisdiction, it automatically triaged it to Montgomery and updated the triage date, which would reset the due date. So those changes also will change from a jurisdiction change will also trigger all these events to happen. And then I saw Amy Francis ask the question. It says, will the system generate a new alert when the case is triaged to the new jurisdiction to alert us to do the assessment? I am pretty sure it does, but let me confirm here. I don't want to go to that alerts page. It should be the exact same alerts. I want to be careful in terms of where I go here because I'm in production and I don't want to show any PHI, but it should generate the alert, and it's also going to show up in the my list of the new jurisdiction, and that would trigger them to assign it to a staff member.
But see, the PASAs are not generated through the LTSS. The PASAs, we get referred directly from the nurse. So I don't think this applies to the PASA. It's just that,
correct,
as the other nurse stated, we need the person to be a resident of Montgomery County, but we just need them to transfer it to us for us to do our part before he goes back. So the issue, the jumping back and forth, the referral doesn't come to the LTS as it comes from nursing homes and hospitals directly to us.
Got it. So if that's the case, then you would need to generate those requests manually yourselves.
Can you again, let me get in here and be a bridge. So hold on, everybody. Hold on. Liz, can you hold on for a second? This is Carrie. Hold on for a second for me. Let's just make sure we kind of get some additional context in here. So this module, these changes pertains to things for which NRIs are completed. So we all know currently the PASAR process does not use the NRI assessment, it uses the STEPS assessment. So until such time as that changes, then this will not influence the PASAR process. You're right. And we'll continue to need to think of other strategies to rectify the problem that you're describing, Ida, that I know you and Donna know all too well.
Liz, you had a question? We might have lost Liz. While we're waiting on her, got a couple other questions in the chat window I'm going to go over quickly. So Wendy Sutton asked, joined the presentation a little late. Can you go back over the attempts to contact section? Sure, no problem. That's relatively simple. So just going back into our active requests, you have an attempts to contact section. So if you wanted to add an attempted contact, you would click on add attempt. You can specify the date. You can specify whether or not it's successful or not. You can specify who you try to get in contact with, and you can log comments if you want. You do have the ability to add as many attempted contacts as you want within a given request. So you can see it as a list. So if I wanted to add more, I can delete, I can edit. All those functions in terms of adding, editing, deleting will continue to remain available so long as the request itself is still active. Once it's inactive, then it becomes read-only.
Okay, this is Ida again. Right now, what I need to know is, will the support planners have access to this attempt to contact? Because right now we are documented in the progress note. Would they have access to the attempt to contact?
They will, and I can demonstrate that. I believe this client is assigned to TCC. So give me 1 second here.
While you're doing that, Nick, just following up on that, Tiffany had a question in the chat box that's directly related to this. So, Tiffany, yes, my preference is that we use the attempts to contact as the way to record those attempts to contact instead of progress notes. I don't think there's a need to duplicate. And as Nick said, the support planners can access these attempts to contact. If you want to put it in both places, it's your choice. But I think that's unnecessary. I think as long as you're documenting in attempts to contact, then we can record the data in the manner that we need.
Does somebody happen to know the name of somebody that works for TCC as a supports planner?
Well, I can tell you the name of somebody who works for AAA.
No, I need somebody from TCC.
Kathy Claybrook, I think, still works there, Nick.
Okay, thanks, Amy.
It's Kathy with a K.
Oh, thank you again. Did I still spell that wrong? What was that last name, Amy? Oh, never mind.
Claybrook?
Okay. No, I'm not seeing them in here.
Try Heather Hernado.
Perfect, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, so I logged into somebody from TCC who is this client's assigned support planning agency, and they do have the ability to see those attempted contacts. Now, in terms of them knowing that this is a new piece of functionality that we've implemented, I actually have a training session with them tomorrow, Carrie and Montzi's group and Keisha's group, so I can make sure I cover this if you want me to.
Yes, please. And I did, Ida, did you underscore that again? I did share this with Monty and Keisha as well on Friday, Nick. At the same time, I shared it with the LHD group. So yes, it has definitely been part of our communication plan to make sure that our SPA network is aware and knows where to look.
Awesome. And just reading through the comments on this chat, again, I know, Carrie, I think I heard you just clarify that instead of using progress notes for attempts to contact, you would use this section. I think there was the same question about the justification, using that in place of case notes, and I think the answer is the same. Like, yes, you should use justification instead of using progress notes.
Yep, we've given you a more specific place to put that. I think it'll be much easier to get to the pertinent data here than all the things that are contained in progress notes. That really is sort of a catch-all, right, for other things that all the stakeholders need to know where there's no other more specific place. So now that we have this more specific place, let's definitely shift to this as our location of documentation.
Thank you. And it's less work for us too. We don't have to write too much.
There you go.
Are there any additional questions?
I just want to give some specificity, greater specificity to answer Benita's question. So if you're talking about documenting a justification for a delay in an assessment or an attempt to contact, yes, there's no need to utilize the progress note for that any longer because we've given you a new and more specific location. However, if there's something else that's not one of those two things that you need to document in progress notes, that should continue.
Hi, can I ask a question?
Sure, go ahead, Joanna.
Hey, on that same page that you're on right now, this is just a matter of semantics. Unable to contact due to referred individuals' unresponsiveness. like in a coma unresponsive or unresponsive to our attempts to contact?
Unresponsive to your attempts to contact.
Just wanted to make sure we're not being too redundant with that. I just want to clarify.
That did not even occur to me, but excellent question. But that's because I'm not a clinician. Yeah, the intention was like, you keep calling and you keep leaving messages and no one calls you back, right? Like that's,
Okay.
that's what
Just
we
wanted to
hear most
clarify.
often. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Excellent question.
Anything else from anybody before we wrap up today?
And for those of you who might have missed this in the beginning, this is being recorded. Nick, did you say the location of the posting? Were we able to do the LTSS training
I'm
site?
pretty sure I can. Let me get it up
Okay.
there. I have to work with Joe, and once it's there, I'll give you a confirmation.
Cool.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, I think we can go ahead and wrap up.
Thanks, Nick. Appreciate you.